We're going to be finishing up Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45 today. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and one of the movies, Spock, Captain Kirk's best friend and first officer of the ship, is having to save the ship by sacrificing his life. He goes into this space where there's a lot of radiation, and he's fixing whatever the problem is. And when Jim finds out, Captain Kirk finds out, he goes down to see him, and he said, "Why, Spock? Why did you do this?" And Spock says, "The needs of the many, the people of the ship, outweigh the needs of the few or even the one." And it's a very touching moment, powerful, emotional moment in the movie. But what this story shows us and about Jesus and the leper is to Christ, to our God, the needs of the one are significant. He doesn't see us as a herd of humans that need to be led to one flock, and he sees us as a group. He sees us as individual people suffering the consequences of sin, and he's moved with compassion to deal with that sin. And yet so often, like the leper, when the leper's healed, we don't listen and hear what he has to say. But the point of the text is that Jesus is willing to cleanse the leper, knowing it's going to hinder his mission. Jesus willingly cleanses this leper, knowing it's going to hinder his mission. That's how important it is for him to show compassion. That's how important this leper is to Christ. And he takes, he feels the leper's condition very deeply, and he wants to help him. And he does. So let's look at this story. We're going to pick it up in verse 40. But before we do that, let's remember where we are. So Jesus has started his preaching ministry. He goes into the synagogue, and the first thing he does is he preaches, and his teaching amazes. But he also casts out a demon. So we hear people being amazed by his teaching authority. They're certainly amazed by his spiritual authority. And then they come that evening to the Simon and Andrew's house at Capernaum, and he heals everybody. And it says his fame spreads throughout Galilee. And that's where Jesus is ministering right now. He gets up early in the morning and goes out to pray. Everybody's looking for him. And when they find him, he said, "Let's go to other villages." Excuse me. For this reason I've come. And so Jesus' purpose in coming is to preach in the synagogues in Israel. And he's starting in Galilee. And so he moves out and he's preaching. And as he goes about and he's doing these things, he's casting out demons and he's preaching the word of God and he's healing sickness. Well, his fame has just taken off. He's gone viral, is how we would say it today. So this leper obviously hears of Christ, and he knows that this is someone who can help him. Now, in their day, leprosy was just a skin disease. It could have been Hansen's disease, but it could have been any spreading skin disease. And lepers were social outcasts. They were the epitome of social distancing. They would have to tear their robe. They would have to yell when they went into a public place, "Unclean, unclean." So just imagine, we've all felt some sense of isolation during the pandemic because we can't go out, we can't be anywhere without a mask, and if you don't have a mask, you certainly feel exposed or unclean. That was this man's life every day. And rabbis would take pride at shooing them away or throwing rocks at them, because if someone touched the leper, they themselves became unclean and would have to go through this cleansing ritual process. And leprosy was such a vile disease, you never talked about healing a leper. It was always talked about a leper being made clean, because there was some aspect of spiritual filth associated with lepers. And some rabbis said it was as hard to cleanse a leper as it was to raise the dead, and they could do neither one. And yet one of the things we're going to see here is that the law that they held dear could declare clean, but it couldn't make clean. So this leper, he comes to Jesus, and let's pick it up in verse 40. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him, and saying to him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Now notice this leper's response to he knows who Christ is. He's heard about him. Christ has gone viral in the area of Galilee. Jesus is in the midst of this preaching ministry, and that's important. He's going from town to town to each of the synagogues in Galilee, and he's preaching the gospel to them. And so in the midst of this preaching ministry, preaching tour we would call it, comes this leper. And he's not supposed to approach people. But he comes to Christ because he's heard of him, he knows his reputation, and he's begging him and says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He has confidence in who Christ is. But he approaches him with humility. He doesn't presume that Christ is going to cleanse him. He knows he can, but he's not sure if he desires to. And so Jesus looks at him, and we'll pick it up in verse 41. Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. As soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him, and sent him away at once, and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So this leper has come. He's begging. He's not presuming that Jesus is going to heal him, but he asks him to. Now, if you were a leper, human touch was rare, if indeed non-existent. And so when Christ sees this man's state, there's no telling his clothes, what he looked like. His clothes were probably dirty. His skin was filthy. He probably was filthy himself. And certainly the idea of him being a leper, I had the idea of spiritual uncleanness. And so for everyone else, this man is repulsive. The closest I think we come today in our society is when sometimes if you're in a big city and you may see watch people who approach a homeless person, as sad as this is, and is that they'll walk away. They just ignore them. They don't want to deal with them. They don't want to know that they exist. That's the kind of response that the lepers would get in their day. But Jesus sees the man for who he is. He doesn't see leprosy. He sees this man's humanity. He sees someone who's been made in the image of God who is affected by disease. And it's really interesting what Christ does as he goes throughout Israel, because in a sense it's an echo of Exodus 23. In Exodus 23, God told Israel, before they go into the land, he says, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared, that is the land. And he says, you listen to him because my name is in him. And he says, when you get into the land, that's verse 24 of Exodus 23, you shall not bow down to their gods nor serve them. And this is what the Lord says life will be like in that land if they are obedient. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. So those things aren't going to fail. And I will take sickness away from the midst of you. No one shall suffer a miscarriage or be barren in your land. And that's not like what Jesus is doing. He's going around taking sickness away. This is what life would have looked like in the land of Israel had Israel obeyed. And Jesus is bringing that promise with him everywhere he goes. He fed the multitudes, we're going to see later. He gave them food and water to drink, and he also gave them healing, spiritual healing and teaching. So Jesus wants to bring these blessings to the people of Israel. And here's a son of Abraham who's struggling with leprosy. And so when Jesus sees that, it says he's moved with compassion. And that word, it can be used of deep-seated emotion. Jesus is very moved by this leper's condition. And so he stretches out his hand and touched him. And that's really significant, because whoever and whatever touched a leper was unclean. But Christ, because of who he is, when he's clean, and when he touches the leper's clean. Christ doesn't become unclean. And that's significant. He says, I am willing, and he reached out and touched him and said to him, I'm willing, be cleansed. And it says, as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. So Jesus doesn't hold back. He shows out of compassion, he heals the leper. And he goes so far as to touch him, to give him that human touch, that sense of community and of being with others. So Christ is ministering to this man on many levels, not just cleansing, his healing. But then he does something else. It says he strictly warned him and sent him away at once. And says, see that you don't tell anybody. That's a double negative there in the Greek. It says, say nothing to no one, is kind of a way we could put it. Don't you tell anybody what has happened, but go show yourself to the priest. So this word for warning is a strong word. It can almost mean it's an angry warning. But I don't think that's the sense here. I think the sense is it's very strong. He's telling him, you go obey the law of Moses. Christ came to fulfill the law, not to destroy the law in his ministry. So he said, see that you go and offer yourself to a priest, show yourself to the priest and make the offering. Take the offering for cleansing with you, because you're going to be clean. And this is a big deal. They're in Galilee. They're probably 17 to 20 miles away from Jerusalem. So the leper's going to have to go to Jerusalem, go to the temple, show himself to the priest. And this would give official status to the man's cleansing. So he's doing it for the man's benefit. He's ordering him to obey Moses' law. He's doing it for the man's benefit so that he can be welcomed back into society. And also as a testimony to the priests that show Christ's ministry is in line with the law. He's doing that which is lawful. And the priest recognizing this and declaring him clean would be a testimony to the priest that who Christ is and what he's doing is lawful. But the man doesn't do it. The next verse 45 has a strong contrasting conjunction, and we could say it this way: but rather than do what the Lord said, he went out immediately and began to preach, is the word, wherever he went, proclaim it freely, and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. So Jesus has encouraged this man and charged him and ordered him to go to Jerusalem and be obedient to the law of Moses. But instead the man does what he wants to do. He's excited. I can't imagine how big a burden is lifted from this man's heart. He's weighed down, and so we can get the psychological response here. But if you come to one who you know can heal you, who you feel has the authority to do these things, and he shows that you're right and has compassion on you as an outcast and removes from you what you could not remove from yourself, isn't the right response to follow through and show him respect by doing what he said, told you to do, that is, go to Jerusalem and show it? So he's wanting to do things his way, but Jesus has told him to do things Moses' way. And the result of this is Jesus could no longer go into the city and minister. He was out in the country. That's what it said. So that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. So this leper's response to Christ ended up hindering Jesus' ministry. He couldn't enter the city any longer. If he did, he was overwhelmed. So in order to be able to minister, he had to stay outside, we would say in the country, so to speak. That's the idea. It's the place where folks didn't live, but you could go, kind of going in the country today, outside of town. So Christ's act of compassion, this individual's need, was on equal footing with the needs of all the people he's going to preach to. Christ was not unwilling to heal him. He was willing. He wasn't worried about what was going to, it's probably a too flippant a way to put it. Let's put it this way. He didn't let the negative consequences of the fame that would arise from healing this man hinder him from addressing his need. And although he couldn't go into the city anymore, people came to him. And so the Lord finds a way always to complete the ministry, even though the things we do may hinder it. So what is the takeaway from this? Well, the takeaway, I think, is we see Christ's deep compassion for us as individuals. We tend to think of Christ's work on the cross in a mass effect, and it is. It's a sacrifice. Is his federal headship of human beings. It is a sacrifice for all human beings, but it is also intrinsically individual. It's not just a mass sacrifice for human beings. It is an individual sacrifice for me. And that's what Christ was willing to do. He was willing to have his ministry hindered a little bit for the sake of cleansing this man. And so compassion costs Christ. And that's true today. Compassion costs us. And yet the cost is worth it, because we are made in the image of God. We are to be ministering to others. So compassion always comes with a cost. And that cost, to Christ, we're worth it. That's just amazing to me. He doesn't hold back, even though it's going to cost him something. Those we help don't always listen. You know, you and I are going to run into that as we minister to folks. Many times we've helped people who call the church in Anniston, and they need help, need financial help. I had a family stop one time many years ago, and it was interesting. They always, these people who called the church always had the same story. Either they were going to Atlanta to live with a relative, and they have a job there. They're going to get on their feet. It's a real opportunity for to have a life change, but their transmission broke or either their brakes went out. It was always one or the other. But this young man called, and he had his wife with him and had a couple of kids. And so Betsy and I, we called the church, and we went down, got them a place to stay. And this is a Saturday. We invited them to come to church. We brought them a meal. And we went back the next night to the hotel where they were staying at that we'd paid for, the church paid for. We went down there, and they were gone. They'd taken advantage once again. And this was their lifestyle, apparently. But that compassion had a cost, and they didn't appreciate the ministry that was given to them. And that's what this leper does. He doesn't appreciate and show proper respect to Christ. And that's how you and I can be towards the Lord when he blesses us. And we want to be careful about that. We want to make sure that we do what Hebrews 12 says. It says, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. We want to respond rightly to the compassion of Christ. I'm encouraged to know that Jesus sees us individually. He sees our struggles individually. And he has done all that needs to be done to deal with us, to strengthen us, and to walk with him, because he has compassion. As moved as he was to heal this leper, he's that moved to save you and me from our sins and to equip us to do the work of the ministry here. And we can take strong encouragement that the cost of compassion to Christ didn't keep him from ministering. That's a lesson you and I need to take hold of. Let's be like Christ and not let the cost that we may incur in ministering to others hinder us in ministering. But let's be like him in doing those things. The grace of the Lord be with you.